Hey, Larken Rose here, and I've often described my self-assigned job as stating the bleeding obvious in such a way that any idiot should be able to understand it. Well, this video is definitely going to fall into that category. So I'm going to start explaining something that's painfully simple, and you may think, does anybody really need to hear this? Yes, because then I'm going to get to something that's equally simple and almost nobody understands or has thought about, as demonstrated by current events and politics and a million other things. So imagine that you're in some little town, some little community, some little society, and people for the most part are getting along peacefully. You trade and you cooperate, and it doesn't mean everybody believes the same things about everything. You can have some people who don't like some people and they disagree about different issues, but for the most part they get along. But every once in a while, somebody in that society does something nasty to somebody else, assaults somebody else, or tries to steal their stuff, basically initiates force or fraud or theft or whatever against somebody else, and then there's a conflict. There's going to be a conflict. Even if the other person doesn't defend himself, there's a conflict now because that person did something nasty to somebody else, and then somebody else will probably get mad about it, probably defend himself, and other people may say, we have to stop this guy from doing it. He created a problem. That person who started that fight is basically an enemy of peaceful coexistence. He's kind of an enemy of the community because, like, what we're trying to do is get along in peace and stuff. And then along comes that guy, you know, committing thuggery and theft and assault and whatever. Now there's a conflict we have to deal with until we can get back to peaceful coexistence. Yes, I know this is obviously stupidly simple, but hang on, bear with me. Then along comes somebody who says, I think I should be in charge of this town. And my first act as self-appointed king of this little town, community, society, whatever, I'm going to make a rule that nobody is allowed to wear a purple top hat on Tuesday. That is now the law. This is my rule. I have done that. Now, somebody, maybe some rebellious, disobedient type, decides to wear a purple hat on Tuesday. Now, the week before, the Tuesday before, if that person had worn a purple hat on Tuesday, nobody would have cared. Some people may think, oh, that's weird. Nobody would have cared. Doesn't make a conflict. Isn't a cause for violence. But now that you have your new ruler, your king, your whatever you want to call him, and he passed a law, he made a rule that says no purple hats on Tuesday, now this person who disobeyed that law by doing something that would have been perfectly fine the week before, now suddenly, now we have to send enforcers after that guy because he broke the law. Well, did he attack somebody? No, he wore a purple top hat. Did he rob somebody? No, it's his own purple top hat. He bought it himself. Is he assaulting people? No, he's just wearing a purple top hat. But that's against the rules. So we're going to have to send out law enforcers after that purple top hat wearer on Tuesdays and institute some justice against that lawless criminal. And if you can imagine for a second that a bunch of people in that town are so stupid that they actually believe that that guy who claimed the right to rule them has the right to rule them, and they actually believe that that rule is somehow magically valid that he just made up about purple top hats, some of them are now going to cheer for the violent victimization of the guy who just wore a purple top hat. The guy who generated the problem, who made there be a conflict, who made there be enemies of society, is not the guy wearing the purple top hat. It's the guy pretending to be authority who made up a rule against wearing a purple top hat. That guy didn't initiate violence, he didn't defraud anybody, didn't rob anybody, didn't assault anybody. But this psycho, power-happy dumbass over here made up a rule, and now it's going to be enforced with violence. So now there is a violent conflict because the brain-dead enforcers of this bozo who claims the right to rule are going to go beat up or cage or whatever the guy who wore the purple top hat on Tuesday against the rules. That is a fabricated conflict, completely unnecessary, completely illegitimate. That is making enemies out of people who don't need to be enemies. Somebody made up a rule which then fabricated irreconcilable differences for no good reason, for no legitimate reason. Completely bonkers. Okay, you're probably still saying this is ridiculously obvious. Who needs to be told this? Every single person who believes in government, all of you, everybody who votes Democrat or Republican or anything in between, or believes in the law or government authority at all in any way, shape, or form, because all of you are falling for and being swayed by something just as ridiculously idiotic and infinitely more destructive than the example of the guy making up a rule about purple top hats on Tuesday. For example, if that guy is having a beer while watching the game in his home, but does that generate a conflict with his neighbors? No. Some of his neighbors might not drink. They might think, oh, alcohol's bad for your health, but I'm not going to come like beat you up with a bat or something. There's no conflict. There's no need to be enemies. There's no violence involved. There's no threat to peace and peaceful coexistence. Like, that guy's having a beer. Well, what if his neighbor, instead of having a beer, smokes a joint? Is that a reason for conflict and violence? Is that a reason for people to be at each other's throats? Is that a reason for people to be enemies? No. Unless some set of parasitical assholes made up a rule that says you're not allowed. We, the ruling class, have declared you're not allowed to possess marijuana. You're allowed to drink alcohol, which is in every way worse for you than marijuana. You're allowed to do that because we have arbitrarily declared it, but that is against the law. You are now breaking the law. And we are now going to send enforcers after you if we catch you, if you're in one of those places where marijuana is still illegal. That is 100% an artificial, illegitimate, fabricated conflict. And the guy smoking the joint, he's not the one who created the conflict. The dumbass who made a rule about it and said, we're going to use force against you if we catch you doing something that isn't violent. It's not attacking other people. It's not robbing other people. We're going to initiate violence, and we're going to blame it on you because you disobeyed our arbitrary made-up rule. We're going to make you an enemy of peaceful coexistence, even though you're not in any way, shape, or form. But we, those who wield political authority, are going to create a conflict. We're going to create enemies. And then, of course, we need armed thugs to go after anybody who breaks our rules, who violates the law, and lawbreakers must be brought to justice. All of you who believe in government have to believe that that's legitimate, because that is the fundamental essence of government, the idea that there's a group of people who have the right to rule, and when they make up some stupid arbitrary rule, it's now bad for somebody to disobey it, even if disobeying it doesn't include theft or violence or anything of the sort. It's like smoking a joint or wearing a purple top hat on a Tuesday. And trust me, there are plenty of actual laws that are just as dumb as the rule against wearing a purple top hat on Tuesday. So government created it. They fabricated an enemy. They manufactured conflict where there was absolutely no need and no reason for that guy to be at odds with that guy or anybody else in the town, in the community, in the society. He was minding his own business, but government fabricated a conflict and is now willing to use violence against the person who didn't start it, who didn't do anything wrong, because no, breaking the law is not immoral. Breaking the law is not immoral. Harming other people is immoral. Attacking people is immoral. Stealing stuff, that's wrong. But disobeying some random arbitrary rule made up by political parasites, that doesn't make you a bad person. And the weird thing is, almost nobody understands that. Anybody who believes in government and political authority at all, you have to accept the premise that disobeying a bunch of political lying scumbags is somehow inherently bad. Well, they did their weird rituals and they called it law. So now the guy who didn't threaten anybody and harm anybody, now he's the bad guy. And the armed thugs that the government sends after him, well, they're just enforcing the law. Don't blame them. They're just following orders and enforcing the law against this horrible criminal who didn't threaten anybody, didn't hurt anybody, didn't actually do anything wrong, but he disobeyed an arbitrary rule. So that is government fabricating a conflict, creating enemies, creating strife. And I start with that example, but literally 90-some% of laws are just as valid examples of fabricating enemies and fabricating problems and fabricating conflict. Now, you may say, well, what about the laws against murder and theft? Murder was bad even before politicians wrote down on a piece of paper, you're not allowed to commit murder. It was already bad. People already had the right to defend themselves against would-be murderers. Politicians scribbling crap isn't what made murder bad. It already was. So all they did was do a weird ritual that still had no bearing on morality. Murder was bad before then. It's bad after. It's not bad because of that. It's just inherently wrong because it's initiating violence against somebody else. All the other laws that don't fit in that category, that aren't just describing something inherently wrong, are arbitrary, random, stupid, illegitimate, made-up conflicts where government says, we're going to command you to do this or forbid you from doing that, and then send armed thugs after you. For example, gun control. We just want reasonable gun control so people don't get shot and, oh, these lovey feelings. We just care, and you don't care if you don't want gun control. Really, what's gun control? For example, I own firearms. If you're for, let's say, all the way forbidding private ownership of firearms, I'm minding my own business. I've never threatened or harmed anybody with my firearms. There was no conflict. There was no violence. Nobody had to be enemies with anybody because I own a thing. Until you supported a politician making up a rule that's saying, you're not allowed to own that thing. Doesn't matter if you threatened anybody or harmed anybody. If we arbitrarily make up a rule that says you're not allowed to own it and you continue to own it, well, the thing that was perfectly fine last week that wasn't seen as immoral or violent or nasty or somehow uncivilized, suddenly now you're a nasty criminal. And now when the state sends violent thugs after you, or after me, well, now I'm the bad guy because I disobeyed the rule. They fabricated conflict, violent conflict. They made enemies out of people who had no reason to be enemies just by declaring these arbitrary bullshit rules. Laws. So I could go down a list of 1,000 examples. I don't really need to. I will mention two more. One being, he didn't pay his taxes. Okay, let me get this straight. So there's a town and people are working and they're trading and they go different places and they buy stuff. Then along comes this guy that says, I am your new lord and master. Everybody has to give me a percentage of everything they earn. Well, yesterday, this may come as a shock to you, if two people voluntarily trade stuff, that's not evil. That's not bad. That's not immoral. That's not theft. That's just people voluntarily trading. But now we have this guy who says, well, no, voluntarily trading is now a bad thing and against the law unless you give this mafia racket, I mean government, a cut of whatever you traded. And if you don't, you're now the bad guy. If you don't comply with this extortion racket, you're now the bad guy, and now the ruling class will send thugs after you and will blame you. Blame the victim. Demand money from somebody who, they don't owe you anything. They weren't trading with you. You just showed up and claimed the right to rob them. And now if they don't let you rob them, they're the bad guy and you can send thugs after them. You, the government parasite, generated a conflict, a violent conflict. You made people into enemies that didn't need to be enemies. And a whole bunch of the surrounding people are unthinking dupes enough that they will cheer for it when the person targeted for extortion by this parasitical lying scumbag, if he doesn't pay up, well, you go make he should pay his fair share of taxes. Yet this is all of you, Republicans and Democrats. This is all of you. You are all cheering in favor of the perpetrator, the thief, the person who fabricated an unnecessary, illegitimate conflict, who made an excuse for violence where there was no need for that. There's no irreconcilable differences like people keeping what they earned, keeping what they traded. But you're all cheering for it. Every Republican, every Democrat, every advocate of government, you are cheering for the ones who fabricated violent conflict, who demolished any possibility of peaceful coexistence by saying, you all have to pay us a cut and we do nasty things to you. How many of you are like, well, he didn't pay his taxes, so I guess, blah, 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 blah. You fell for it. You fell for his game, and now you are cheering for violence against somebody who didn't commit violence, didn't harm anybody, didn't threaten anybody, but he disobeyed an arbitrary rule of a lying psychopathic scumbag who claimed to be authority. And if you resent him for not paying protection racket fees to the authority, you have been duped and you're now a cheerleader against peaceful coexistence and in favor of fabricated violence. That is what every voter is. Democrat, Republican, anything in between, I don't care. That's what all of you are doing. You are voting for a ruling class that will create violent conflict out of nothing by making up arbitrary rules. And I will throw in one last example, which is relevant to today. Oh, people come to our town and we sell them stuff. They came into my shop. Yeah, there's some people from out of town and we chatted for a while and they bought some stuff. And sometimes I like to visit their town. And I go over here and I go on a cruise down there and I go sightseeing over this place. And we have visitors over here and it's really cool. And, you know, we're all getting along. There's no violent conflict. We're not enemies. Like somebody came from a different place, looks pretty different, sounds pretty different. We might not even speak the same language, but I mean, we can trade. That's sort of a universal language. It's been around for millennia. So what's the problem? Well, there is no problem. We're not enemies. There's no conflict unless some ruling class says that person doesn't have the permission of politicians to be anywhere inside this gigantic line that those politicians have arbitrarily declared to be their territory, just their gang turf, basically. We didn't give that guy written permission to be on our gang turf, so now we are going to generate a conflict. We might send guys with guns to kidnap that person, not because he threatened anybody, not because he hurt anybody. He was just chatting, hanging out, trading, doing his thing. But we, the ruling class, are going to fabricate a conflict, fabricate violence and hatred on both sides. We're going to make enemies and we're going to call it immigration law. Because that's what that is. It is a conflict which is 100% a result of a parasitical ruling class making up arbitrary bullshit where it is absolutely unnecessary and absolutely illegitimate. Now, in case I have to explain this to anybody who doesn't have the mental capacity of a 5-year-old, if somebody from another country comes over and then attacks somebody or robs somebody, yeah, that's a conflict because that person initiated violence. That's a conflict just like it would be if somebody who lived here did that. And that has to be resolved. Stop the person who's committing aggression or theft. But government never, ever, ever just limits itself to focusing on the people who actually try to harm others. They constantly fabricate rules to generate conflict, to divide and conquer, to pit group against group. And as long as you imagine their rules to be legitimate, you're just a pawn for the worst people in the world. If you genuinely believe that violence should be used against somebody for smoking a joint in his living room, You are anti-freedom. You are anti-civilization. Makes no difference that it was called law. If you genuinely believe that thugs of the state should violently attack someone for possessing a firearm, not threatening somebody, not shooting somebody, not killing somebody, just possessing a thing, so we better send armed thugs from the government after him, you are the problem. You are why we can't have peaceful coexistence, because you're a cheerleader for the ones generating violence and creating enemies. If you want anybody taxed, extorted, to fund anything that they don't want to fund, and then you cheer for IRS or other thugs stealing their property, maybe even locking them in a cage, you are why we can't have peaceful coexistence. Now, it's easy to point to the rule maker and go, well, he came along and he made up these rules. Guess what? The rules don't have any power unless you're dumb enough to fall for his games and actually imagine him to be authority, which will then make it so that you're cheering for the perpetrators of immoral violence and hating the victims of it. If you hate someone for being an illegal alien, you are anti-peace. You are against peaceful coexistence. You are in favor of violent aggression, because all illegal immigrant means is a human being was somewhere without the permission of politicians. Same thing with gun control, same thing with the war on drugs, same thing with 1,000 different stupid rules from government. There are people who come along and claim the right to rule, and they make enemies out of people who had no reason to be enemies. And if you vote for them, or if you even believe in the crap they spew, he's against the law, he didn't come here legally, you're not allowed to have that plant, you're not allowed to have that kind of gun, you're not allowed to not give money to the ruling class to fund this warmongering or this socialist program, you didn't do as the master said, you're a bad slave, so we rejoice in the fact that you're getting whipped. That is the mentality of everybody who believes in government. Every single one of you, because it is inherent to the belief in authority. Authority means the right to rule, which obviously logically implies an obligation of others to obey. That's why you think it's bad and wrong for somebody to be a lawbreaker. It's not. It's bad for somebody to commit murder or theft, whether they have a badge or not, and regardless of what the law might say. But no, disobeying arbitrary dictates of political psychopaths doesn't make you a bad person. And if you believe otherwise, you are why we can't have peaceful coexistence. You're the problem. Yeah, you're not the malicious thing that came along and made up these stupid rules, but you're the one that gives that malicious thing all of the power it has by your belief in this insane thing called authority, and your belief that disobedience to random dictates of political psychopaths makes someone a bad person and deserving of law enforcement going after them. So if you look out the world and go, oh, can't we get along? If you still believe in government, no, we can't, and you're why we can't. Even if it's well-intentioned, even if it's just, well, it's what you were always taught, because that was true of almost everybody. It was true of me. I used to be a statist, used to think government was real and legitimate. But if you're lamenting the violence in the world and you still believe in government, got bad news for you. The violence in the world is a direct result of your belief system. And yeah, there are nasty individuals intentionally creating war and doing all sorts of evil crap. All of their power comes from you and people just like you who imagine their authority to be real when it's not. So if you're looking out the world and lamenting all the horrible things going on, look in a mirror. If you haven't yet given up the belief in government and political authority, you are part of the reason those things are happening and will continue to happen until you and lots of other people outgrow the insane superstition of authority.